there's usually a great transition or two in each chapter, and that's probably a low estimate. But the thing I want to mention about that is just that sorry?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, I thought you went out. But
No.
The transition there, and by the way, since you mentioned his criticism, is there anything that you note in this that you think doesn't work with it in the context of this? Because I think that intermission, we might as well just talk about it now, since you brought it up. The intermission, it works in several ways. It works in the sense that there is quality writing still within that, even though you took it out of the initial book. But it also shows your development as a writer, and it works in the filmic sense that it's like a exclusive deleted scenes that come on. That, as you said, the DVDs of the
And how many times have you seen a DVD where of a say a Michelangelo Antonioni film, and they'll show an exclusive, his early documentary, his early 12-minute documentary about the workers in the Po Valley. I'm on one of my DVDs. It shows it, and you see the development of Antonioni from a 1945 documentary until maybe the 1964. I think it's Red Desert is the one that has that on, and that's one of the reasons to do it too. Because remember, we're also dealing with the meta world outside here. The book itself is Manny's book, The Norwegian in the Family, but the exterior book is A Norwegian in the Family, and that's where the Manny-Dan battle that started in Tumbleweeds comes to fruition here. Even if we haven't read Tumbleweeds, we get that Manny Cole manuscript is different from Dan Schneider, the writer within the books, meta argument with it. So Dan Schneider, as the writer within the book, exists as a character, and by seeing this other piece that is acknowledged, I think I acknowledged that it didn't work in an earlier book. We see that the Dan Schneider, the writer, is saying that he's not perfect, but he's not a con artist the way Manny is a con artist. Manny is constantly gaming the book to put himself in a favorable position, as he did to a minor extent in Tumbleweeds, to a great extent in the Vincetti brothers, and to a little bit of an extent here. It's not as much as in Vincetti brothers because Manny Cole never finished this manuscript. He probably would have been more self-aggrandizing had he finished the manuscript.
With the comparison of the Vincetti brothers too, I was thinking of how the chapters are named as they are because that the titular character has some importance to that event. These ones, even though they're named Polly, the Mule, Big Frank, Norwegian, it's almost as if those titles are red herrings to get the same effect, but they really don't encompass any single character.
Well, that's true. As I said, though, Paulie is the main character of the book in my mind, not Big Frank, as Jessica suggests, although you could argue about it. And I think it's important, since Paulie is the oldest character, he's the foundation. Paulie sets up the mob milieu. That's important. The second book is about the coming of the foundation. So it has to be the mule, named after the mule. Big Frank is where the book sort of turns in the third book. And by the end of Big Frank, we're about the midway point of the book, since the first three books are about the same length as the last book itself. And in that section, we get the full flowering. That's really, Big Frank is really the meat of the book, where we get all of the characters together, virtually all of the characters, and all of the major events happen. And then the second half of the book, in a sense, we get the whole bit digression, and it's called the Norwegian, and that's the least. That's the section that's the least tied to the Norwegian. But in a sense, that's appropriate because the Norwegian is, in a sense, the character that brings about everything, and we see also a quickening of the pace once we get to that book. Events happen much more quickly in that book after we get past Bit's acid trip. So in a sense, they are a red herring.
Before you go on, that it makes you a better and faster reader reading this book, because you all of a sudden you can read 20,000 words as quick as you would a 5,000-word chapter, because the scenes condense, and then especially with the Norwegian book, the scenes go by so quickly that you're constantly speed reading, but you're getting all the essentials of it if you're fully engaged with the book. And I find that's why it's so very filmic, because things come. This is the fastest a book has registered its words at the speed of light, just as films do. And before we get into some specific scenes, I wanted to talk about one more thing, and that is, what do you think can come out of this book exactly? Because the thing that I get the most out of it is that you can get certain characters spread about and still get the same character development. You'll see Frank Sinatra, you'll see Tony Luft, or you'll see various other celebrities and fictive characters commingling, and then even though they're separated by sometimes 400 pages or 1.5 million words, as is the case of Polly's wife, you still get the same character development because they're so well rendered in their initial outings.
Okay, but what is the actual question then?
The question is that what do you think that is the most essential lesson from this book, is that character development, it doesn't have to be linear in any way. You don't need to have a character fully developed over the course of, say, 200,000 words. They can be separated by 200,000 words, and you can still get the essence of the character.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole purpose of total immersion. Total immersion isn't just dialogue, but it's using the dialogue to develop the character. Because as I said many times, character is plot. No one's going to give a flying fuck about some white whale if we don't have some identification with the members of the Pequod or the crew of the Pequod. No one's going to give a shit about a runaway boy in Missouri and a black slave in the 1830s or 40s, whenever Huck Finn is set, if we don't get an in to the Bildungsroman of Huckleberry Finn, or the girl Francie Nolan in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. So you have to have these scenes that are so indelible, whether it's the masturbation scene of Tony Luft when he asks out Carla Maravelli, yes, or his repeated 8 consecutive lonely Christmases where he elaborates on this fantasy of meeting Buster Crabbe. He may have met him, but he may have all just imagined it. And in fact, I based that on my own meeting of the host of a TV show called Romper Room at a Woolworth store when I was 4 or 5. I forget Miss whatever her name was. The host of the Romper Rooms, which was a syndicated children's show around the country. Each town, like Baltimore or New York or Boston, had its own. Hold on.
You're hearing beeping. It's just something in the background.
Oh, that's you.
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was my house.
It's just something in the background.
Oh, okay.
Go on.
So I remember as a kid thinking it would be a much better meeting, and I met her. I guess she shook my hand and gave me a piece of candy, but I thought, wouldn't this be interesting if over the years I over elaborated that. I didn't meet Reggie Jackson, the famous New York Yankee baseball player, in 1978 when I went to Yankee State. No, 77. But I remember him waving to me, and I remember seeing how many people who get autographs signed, they like to elaborate their stories. They may stand in line for an hour, pay $50 to get some baseball or sports star to sign their card, but they always have some bullshit. Oh, he said to me this, that, or the other thing. But that's the kind of thing that defines a Tony Luft. The very fact that Paulie Maravelli can worry about his orgone box early in the book and then be plotting all these things to capture the Norwegian or to get back and get his family up to being the 6th family instead of the 5th and a half family. All of these things define these characters. Big Frank looking at the sneakers and remembering the priest. Big Frank and Ass Rape Delicious Boy. Big Frank during the blackout in 1965. Bit von Rheingold and Andy Warhol's love-hate relationship, so to speak. All of these things.
And one of the most amusing scenes is when Andy Warhol meets Big Frank as well, because is clearly attracted to him, and Big Frank has nothing to do it. But then he sets him up with a bunch of Big Frank's potential fuckmates.
Yeah.
But let's talk some specific scenes now and some specific characters. I can't recall whether this actually occurred within this book, because as I told you, the scenes seem to mesh so well that your memory kind of distorts exactly where they occurred. But one of the most amusing scenes, and we'll talk about like the contrast between humor and actual drama in this book, is when Polly Maravelli encounters a Jehovah's Witness, and the Jehovah's Witness tries to barge within his door, and he slowly lets him go on and calmly constructs his silencer. That is a hilarious scene, but it has actual dramatic implications as well.
Well, yeah, and that's another scene from my real life. Not that I ever killed a Jehovah's Witness, but I think, I don't know if I've told you, but I've told some of the people on the E-list about one time I had a Jehovah's Witness, this middle-aged woman and this young, pretty late teens girl, maybe 17, 18, 19, when I was about 24, 25, a year or two before I left New York, came knocking on my door. And usually I just slammed the door on them, or didn't open it if I had an idea who it was. But I saw this pretty girl, so I invited them in, and the old lady sat in a chair, and the young girl was on the couch, so I sat next to her. And then every time I would like cross my legs or move my arms, I'd inch maybe an inch over on the couch closer to the girl as I was talking to the old lady, and I could tell the young girl was getting more and more uncomfortable. And I would slowly be starting and asking questions about as I was being explained why Jehovah does this or that. Be talking, well, what does Jehovah have against sex, or what is why? So I was constant, and so I made her feel uncomfortable. And I thought, well, what would a mobster do in a similar situation where this person bothered? And so Paulie would just, and there's probably at least 6, 7, 8 times where Paulie just pulls out a gun and shoots people, from his own workers to this guy to pulling out a gun at the commission meeting.
One of the grandest moments in the book, and probably one of the top conversations in all of literature, is the section called Over a Hydrox. We'll talk about how.
What page is that?
Sections before that. That is on page 1048.
1048, okay.
And it connects to. This is the beginning of Over the Hydrox. I can't remember the page of the specific scene, but Polly is being driven crazy by this idiot who continues to argue with him that Oreos are better than Hydroxes and the game first, and he eventually plugs him. And
well, that's one of his employees. That's the cousin of Alan Alda, the actor, Artie DeBruzzo.
Yes, we'll talk about that section too and how well it ties in. But the thing about that scene that is interesting is that you have the scene itself play out, and it has dialogue that it's exactly as you said in another segment that we talked. They're talking about something specific, but they're really talking about something else, at least especially, and what that something else is different to both of them. And then you get, after he's plugged, Vito Vincetti coming in there and spilling his crumbs all over the corpse again. And what's amusing about this is this occurs before the ass rape murder. Paulie even alludes to that but he says that, what did I tell you about dropping crumbs on the dead, Vito? So he's done this clearly many, many times, and he'll never learn his lesson to stop contaminating the corpse. Talk about that one too, because that one is clearly far more dramatic than the Jehovah's Witness interaction between him and Polly, but it has the same contrast with the humor effect. You've talked about Norwegian being a dark comedy, but while I would agree with that, the high moments of drama are the equal of any other piece of literature.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. Now, do what I say and don't drop crumbs on the corpse. Oh, sure, said Vito as he wiped his mouth. Paulie said, I told you before, Vito, don't be eating over dead people. Now, where was you? I was well, me and that waitress what started here last month, we was getting to know each other, you know. That explains why you didn't hear nothing. Tell me, Vito, have you ever gone a full fucking month without cheating on that beautiful wife of yours? Oh, sure, boss. Oh, yeah, when? Once in July of '58. Remember? That was the month Pesky Feldman and Vito DiCipio broke my ribs and my shin bone. I was laid up for like 6 weeks. Hard to get laid when you're laid up. Paulie pursed his lips and then shook his head. Vito said, "You need me, boss?" Paulie slapped Vito. "You see that stiff? Which one? Which one? There ain't no bloodbath here. Just one stiff. Artie had an accident. Remember him? The stiff you crumbed all up? Sorry, boss. What happened? He must have fucked up worse than me, right?" so, uh, so I mean, yeah, you have to use, like I said, 2.5 million words. There's, I think I may quote from it in here. I don't remember, or I may have a character reading a small portion of it. Years ago, I read a 1.1, 1.2 million word book. Actually, it's divided into two books so long. It was called Saronia, Texas. And it was basically a Texas soap opera. I read this in my late teens, early O's. It took me about a month or so to read. And, you know, I was younger, so I wasn't as quick a reader, and it was quite boring. So, and it was just a soap opera, and it wasn't the worst thing I ever read, but its length, it was just probably about 5 times longer than it needed to be. But it's utterly devoid of humor. And as I've said, humor has to grease the wheels of drama. When you're doing something long, you have to have some moments of humor. You know, probably one of the few things that I can think of that is lacking humor or mostly devoid of humor that works in a long form is the 3+ hours of A Long Day's Journey into Night. But that's because even that is not super long, and it's so well wrought. But had that gone on maybe another hour or so, it would have started to get a bit tedious. And some people have said there are some tedious moments, probably here or there, a few scenes that maybe could have been shortened a little bit. But you have to have something like the crumbs being dropped on dead people. You know, you have to have Paulie's outrage over the desecration of a corpse rather than his outrage over killing someone because they're arguing about whether a Hydrox is better than an Oreo. So, you know, and for people who don't know, a Hydrox was a cookie that was made before the Oreo. The Oreo was the imitation of a Hydrox. And so, you know, you have to have these kinds of scenes that lighten things up. It was a way to bring in another celebrity, Alan Alda. And many of these celebrities have ties to New York. Alan Alda is originally from New York. And so I said, you know, I had a list of celebrities like John Saxon and a number of these actors that people might have known or met. And it was just a way to work it in. Alan Alda at this time in the early 60s was a decade before he became famous on MASH. He's working in Broadway, trying to make it and whatnot. So he would stop off at some local cafe or bar to visit his cousin or whatnot. And it's just a way to introduce things and give a sense of the 1960s. As I said, this is a Technicolor production. It's not the black and white darkness of the Vincetti brothers. It has to be Technicolor and bold. It's like one of those Woody Allen movies with Peter Sellers and one of these all-star romps of the 1960s where people are just running around doing crazy things. And by doing that, by having these comic moments, it makes when you get to those dramatic moments all the more dramatic because it isn't just sort of slouching towards Bethlehem, dragged through the mud of life. It's up and down, and it's more realistic. And when you get that moment of release, well, the comedy is a release. So you get that antiphon of comedy and drama, which heightens both of them.